The content of this video may be disturbing or frightening to some viewers. Discretion is advised. These stories are found on Reddit's No Sleep subreddit.
My friends and I explored an abandoned school. I got into urbex at an early age, middle school to be exact. This was long before it became popular on YouTube or TikTok. I could have been more outgoing, academically advanced, and particularly good at sports. Neither I nor any of my friends had much extra money to throw toward spending afternoons at the mall or arcade. My first experience with urbex started when some friends and I had a sleepover at Caitlin's. Caitlin lived in a trailer in a rural village. Many houses nearby were large and expensive, not quite mansions, but pretty close. We were eating popcorn and watching a movie when Caitlin mentioned an abandoned home behind her house. She explained that the couple there had a nasty divorce and the house was up for sale. Caitlin had never seen the house inside, but her mom mentioned it was lovely. I had an idea to liven up our night. "Why don't we go see it?" I asked. They all looked at me like I was crazy. "We've snuck out before. Why not just go over, take a look, then come right back?" Caitlin shrugged. "I don't see why not," she said. Caitlin distracted the family dog with a treat while we crept out the back door. It took less than 5 minutes to reach the house. We tried unsuccessfully to pick the lock, but luckily, Jessie found an unlocked window. The interior of the house was magnificent. The floors were all marble, and an extravagant fireplace was in the living room. We began to look around. Each room seemed more luxurious than the last. One of the more notable spaces was a hot tub, oddly placed at the landing of the stairs in the front room. After an hour of exploring, we returned to Caitlin's. Luckily, we got back in without waking her parents. Since that night, urbex has been my passion. Caitlin and I explored many abandoned places together. Our selection of locations expanded over the years as our curfew got later and we got our licenses. Although Caitlin was adventurous, there was still one destination she avoided. Oak River School was one of town's most insidious yet least known scandals. It seemed to be a typical high school. It boasted average academic scores and a great football team. But below the surface, something wasn't right. A record number of graduates from Oak River were diagnosed with cancer, particularly leukemia. Some were diagnosed only a few years after graduation, others not until decades later. The school was abruptly closed, and students were sent to temporary sites to continue classes while a new school was quickly rebuilt several miles away from the old one. Eventually, the truth came out. The soil Oak River High was built on was used as a dumping ground for nuclear waste in the 1940s. The cancer rates weren't a coincidence. The old Oak River was never torn down. My aunt, Cora, was one of the many unfortunate alumni who developed leukemia. She passed away when I was 17. She was the stereotypical cool aunt who let me watch R-rated movies and served me Pepsi in a wine glass whenever I visited. More than that, Cora was the only one I could be myself around in my family. From holding me as I cried when I wrecked my bike at 6 years old to helping me through my first breakup at 15, I could always count on her. Losing Cora was the worst experience of my life. I'd always wanted to explore Oak River, but for some reason her death made me fixate on it even more. I had to see what it looked like. The radioactive school frozen in time. I felt like if I walked through the same hallways or stepped into the classroom where Cora had been so many years before, she would be there with me. Of course, I was smart enough to realize this was just a morbid fascination from grief and that nothing would change once I left. But I still couldn't let go of the thought of going to Oak River. "Come on," Jess agreed to go, and he's bringing all her photography equipment, I begged Caitlin during our phone call. "No," she responded. "You know that's the one place I won't go." I accepted her answer and called Jess to let her know we would go without Caitlin. We met at the back entrance of Oak River at 8 that night. The school wasn't as hard to break into as I expected, and we quickly found ourselves in the hallway. Some old trophies and medals were still on display behind the dusty glass. Why didn't they take those? I wondered out loud. "They're probably all covered in radioactive dust," Jess laughed. Ron, Jess's boyfriend, met us shortly after we found our way in. He's into paranormal investigation and wanted to try out some of his equipment, as the school was rumored to be haunted. They proceeded to the gym and were messing with the EMF sensor for a while, so I decided to look around independently. The first few classrooms weren't as bare as I expected. They still had posters on the wall and other equipment out. I found a globe and spun it, instantly regretting my decision as dust flew into the air. Luckily, we wore masks and gloves to limit our exposure as much as possible. I heard a rustling noise. I turned around to see where it was coming from. Next to the boarded-up window, I noticed a mostly wilted potted plant. But the plant wasn't dead. It was moving. Very subtle movements. I had to do a double take to be sure of what I saw. "What the hell?" I whispered. The only way I can describe the movement is almost a sort of twitching. I got out my phone to record and picked up a ruler to poke it. The plant coiled around the ruler tightly, almost yanking it out of my hand. I yelled and jumped back. Jess and Ron came running. I tried to explain what happened, but they didn't seem convinced. Ron found a pointer by the chalkboard and poked the plant again. It didn't move. I stammered, trying to explain what happened. Jess and Ron exchanged glances. "Maybe you shouldn't be walking around here alone," suggested Jess. Ron nodded. "Let's all just stay together," he suggested. I reluctantly agreed. We took a look in a few other classrooms. Jess photographed each as we went along. Eventually, we made our way into the cafeteria. We found some old trays, glasses, and even unopened cans of food. Ron halted as we entered the kitchen, almost causing Jess to run into him. "Why'd you do that?" she snapped. "Shh, listen," whispered Ron. Through the silence, I could hear a faint chewing noise. It continued for a few minutes, then came the clang of a can hitting the ground. A light rustling followed. We stood there, frozen. Ron involuntarily coughed. A figure emerged from the darkness. Jess turned the flashlight to it. It wasn't an animal, but it couldn't be human. It stood on two legs and was almost 7 feet tall, bony, with yellow-tinged skin speckled with red boils that looked like they were about to pop. The figure let out a groan that sounded equal parts terrified and angry. Jess screamed, dropping her flashlight. Ron and Jess took off in one direction while I ran in another. I ducked into a janitor's closet. I tried to quiet my breathing as much as possible, even removing my mask, trying to catch my breath. I sat against the wall, head in my hands, trying to stave off a panic attack. I looked around the closet a bit, seeing if there was anything I could use for self-defense. All I found was an old broom. I stayed quiet for a while, then hesitantly stepped out of the closet when I was convinced the creature was nowhere close. I began looking for Jess and Ron. I tried calling Jess, but my phone did not service. I heard labored breathing and stomping down the hallway. Damn it, I thought. I noticed a door on my left. It was glass, but was fogged up to the point where I couldn't see through it. The hallway was a dead end, and I could hear the figure getting closer. I opened the glass door and entered the room. The air was thick and humid. I struggled to keep from coughing. I put the broom through the door handles to barricade myself in. I hoped the figure would pass me by, but I heard a pounding at the door. I wasn't sure how much force it would take to break the old glass, and I had no interest in finding out. I panned the room with my flashlight, looking for another way out. My flashlight passed over a dark, reflective abyss. This was the old pool. The walls were covered in a mixture of black and green molds. I remembered Cora had mentioned being on the swim team years before. There was a door on the other side of the room. I began making my way to the other side, but quickly realized some overturned bleachers blocked my way. I tried lifting them, but it was of no use. "Harper!" Jesse yelled from the door on the other side of the room. Noticing the predicament I was in, Jesse and Ron attempted to move the bleachers but weren't able to either. At this point, the glass door was splintering from the humanoid monster pounding on it. "You know how to swim, right?" asked Ron. I nodded. "Are you crazy?" screamed Jesse. She can't swim through that radioactive bullshit. I'd already accepted my fate of wading through this disgusting abandoned pool and tried to reassure her I'd be fine. I found a piece of wood to set my backpack on, trying to keep it as dry as possible. I stepped into the cold, dark water. The water felt thicker than I expected, like moving through jello. The smell was a repulsive combination of decay and metallic. I swam as fast as possible. I'd almost reached the edge when the water began rippling. My right leg stopped moving. It was caught on something. Jesse and Ron noticed my struggle. Ron jumped into the water and tried to pull me forward. He shined a flashlight through the dark waters, revealing a labyrinth of dark green limbs. "What the hell?" Ron whispered. The water began to rush. I felt the slimy substance tighten around my leg and screamed. Ron began thrashing around, cursing and yelling. I frantically grabbed my backpack, retrieving my pocket knife from the front pocket. I took a deep breath, went underwater, and hacked at the slimy substance trapping my leg. It began twitching as the grip loosened, and I freed myself. Jesse was pulling Ron out of the water on the other side, crying frantically. Something most people don't know about Jessie is that she had an extreme fear of water and couldn't swim. A near-drowning experience when she was 4 had left her traumatized. I pulled myself to the surface and we ran out the door. Ron was limping. He had a nasty gash on his left calf. Once we got some distance from the pool, we stopped, and Jessie tied her jacket around it to slow the bleeding. Jessie's phone rang, startling us. "Caitlin?" she answered, placing it on speaker. A grainy FaceTime call lit up the screen. The background was dark, but looked familiar. Caitlin was in the classroom closest to the entrance. "Caitlin, listen to me. You need to leave. There's some weird shit happening here," Jessie tried to explain. The connection wasn't good. The call cut out every few seconds, making it difficult to understand. Jesse, Ron, and I tried to explain what was happening, but Caitlin clearly didn't understand. The connection continued to get worse the further Caitlin got into the school. Eventually, the call dropped entirely, and we could not dial back out. "Jesse, you and Ron get out and go find some help. I'll find Caitlin and meet you guys on the other side." Ron tried to protest. Luckily, Jesse convinced him that the bleeding was too severe to continue. As we parted ways, Jesse and I agreed that if Caitlin and I weren't safely out in 15 minutes, she would call for help. "Caitlin!" I called out as I reached the front of the building. "Help!" I heard her yell frantically. I ran towards the sound and saw her. We sprinted towards each other, but she tripped over something while we were in the process. A figure donning an archaic gas mask emerged behind her, grabbing her ankles and dragging her away. "No!" I yelled. I tried to run towards the assailant, but someone grabbed me from behind. As I tried to fight my way out, I flailed, slamming my head into the wall. I felt dizzy and everything went dark. I saw the light. I knew what people always said about going into the light. Was this death? "She's awake," I heard. A paramedic was kneeling over me. I jumped. As I regained consciousness, I started stammering. "What's going on? Where's Caitlin?" The EMT tried to calm me. My mom and Jesse were nearby. My head hurt a lot, and my arms and legs were bruised. I was transported to the hospital. That night, the only answer I could get as far as Caitlin's whereabouts was that they were looking for her. The next day, I was informed by police that Caitlin's body was found in the school. The stairs had collapsed, crushing her. I tried to tell the police about the man in the gas mask, but they didn't believe me. They pretty much nodded, then had a social worker follow up with me with information on trauma counseling. What bothers me the most is, I'm not even sure Jess and Ron believe me. Something sinister is still happening in that school. I'm going back. River Oak won't take anyone else from me.
I think my dead grandma is stalking me. I've never posted anything like this before, but I seriously don't know what to do, and I don't know who to talk to about it. To start, I need to give adequate background on how I grew up. Sorry if this seems tedious. I'll try to make it brief. When I was 9 years old, my mom up and left my dad, leaving him responsible for me and my 2 siblings. My dad had my grandma move in so there would be someone at home while he worked. My grandma always loved my little brother, but seemed to dislike my older sister and hated me. I have no idea why she was like that, but from then on, she was our primary guardian. My dad, who used to be super involved in our life, became distant and eventually absent. If he wasn't working, he was out drinking or off doing God knows what, leaving my grandma in charge of everything. I won't get too detailed about the abuse, but I'll just say she was a violent and vindictive drunk. She was also a chain smoker and went through a carton of cigarettes a week. If my siblings or I were in trouble, she would scream in an awful shrill voice, "Come to my office." But her office was our backyard, where she'd smoke non-stop and yell at us in the Arizona heat for hours. My grandma passed away around 2 years ago from lung cancer. My brother called me that day crying, but I felt nothing. She didn't have a funeral, and even if she did, I believe no one would have shown up. My dad and extended family members found it disturbing that I wasn't really mourning her, but they didn't know the extent of the abuse that me and my siblings endured. Or if they did, they didn't care. My extended family often talked about me behind my back, calling me callous or cold, or even a sociopath. After this, I distanced myself from my family and ended up going low contact with them. I ended up moving to a different state for a fresh start. And currently I'm working at a cafe while I attend college. I think about a month ago I had been having strange nightmares where I'm in an unfamiliar house. And in the last week I've been experiencing weird things when I'm awake. The nightmares are vivid and always have me in the same house. It's one I've never seen before. The walls are white and flat, and it smells like feces and rotting food, even though the house seems spotless. The whole house is empty. Drawers, cabinets, fridge, and freezer, all except the master bedroom. The house is all white and marble, appliances and all, which gives me an eerie vibe. The master bedroom is upstairs and is not only decorated with white, marble, and gold, but is also seemingly where the foul smell is coming from. I never make it far into the room before I can't take the smell, but also when I get closer to the bed, a sense of dread and fear encapsulates me. It feels as though my life is in danger, and like whatever will happen to me will be long and torturous. The nightmares always end with me scrambling out of the room, tripping over myself, and falling to my knees outside of the room. That's when I feel something breathing on the back of my neck. I slowly turn to see what sort of looks like my grandmother. It resembles her somewhat, but I never really able to get a good look at her. I just know that something is off about her, in an uncanny kind of way. Like she's almost human, but not entirely, or more accurately, that it's nearly her. At first, this nightmare only happened once, but after about a weekish or so, it started happening more frequently, and she started calling my name. But she doesn't sound right. Like her voice sounds off. Lately, I have been seeing her in my peripheral, out my windows, or I see her shadow darken my door, but no one else seems to see her. After I started seeing her more frequently, my apartment has begun to smell like feces and rotting food, and some of my neighbors have complained, and no amount of cleaning will make the smell go away. I don't want to tell anyone in fear that they would dismiss this or call me crazy, but I know I'm not, and I know this is real. She's no longer hiding in my peripheral. She's watching me while I type this. She won't go away, and the smell is getting worse.
For the past 14 days, I have been hunted by a monster. My name is Lucian, and for the past 14 days I have been chased by a monster. I should begin by saying that I am not a good person, and I'm pretty sure I will die here, so this is my confession. It all started 3 weeks ago. I was low on cash and about to be evicted. Me and my friend Jesus, a fat guy with ADHD who always seemed to look on the bright side, was living in a bad part of town, so we were willing to do almost anything for a few bucks. We were planning on selling some of our stuff when one of our roommates came in. Will was a short, skinny guy, had long hair and a mustache, and always had on this stained blue hoodie. He told us that a rich old guy was approaching us and that we could snatch, run, and pawn the items. We had all stolen before. For Jesus, it was games. For me, it was weed. And for Will, it was cash. We were not strangers to the idea, but didn't want to jump to it. Jesus was the first to reject it. Come on, man. Just 10 minutes in that house, and we can pay off any of our debts and more. Will was enthused about this idea. What is there is even worth grabbing? I couldn't help but question this, considering I didn't want to rob an older man for nothing. He's some collector of artifacts and stuff, one of them archaeologists or whatever. Will seemed proud of himself for this fact. Me and I looked at each other before nodding. We were at the end of our lines, and Will had convinced us. We pulled up to the house in my van on the night of the break-in. We had all brought masks and gloves. I had also brought a gun, just in case we had run into something. But thinking about it now, what was the older man going to attack me like some feral animal? We made it into the house after Jesus climbed the fence and unlocked the gate from the inside. For being the heaviest, he was athletic. Will went in through a window and opened the door for us. We started creeping around the guy's house, and contrary to what Will promised, there was nothing but talismans and notes. There were a few skeletons of animals around, but nothing worth big money. So we split up, all going in different directions. I was the one to come across it. In the study of the house, there was this leather-bound book with strange engravings on the front. It had jewels inlaid within the cover, and it was just sitting on a desk. Around the room were several notes hanging from boards, all with strange symbols. I picked up the book and read through it. One of the pages caught my eye. On it was the drawing of some skinny creature with long arms and legs, and its head was some deer skull. The writing seemed Latin, and I tried mumbling the words out loud. I felt a prick from my finger, and the book felt warmer. From the doorway, the old man shouted, "Stop!" But it was too late. I dropped the book in surprise and pulled out my revolver, shooting the older man twice, once in the chest, the other in the neck. I grabbed the book and ran, the realization of what I had done setting in. Jesus was over the fence, and Will dived out the window to return to the car. As Will entered the back, I got in the driver's seat, and Jesus was in the passenger seat. I started driving. I was about to go when Will shouted that something had his leg. I turned around and saw Will holding a dark-clawed hand around his ankle. I pulled out my revolver and shot. The bullet hit the hand but pierced Will's leg. I started driving, and from the side mirror I could see something pulling itself from the ground. Then it began to run on all fours, this shambling mound of bones and rot. It was keeping pace with us. People saw us. People heard us. We had to keep moving. Not to escape the law, but to escape that thing. I drove all night. Jesus had checked his phone, and our names were starting to spread. Will had used his belt and a pen to make a tourniquet for his wound. At some point, we lost track of that. We stopped at a gas station and got supplies for Will. We also brought food and water, considering we were now wanted and probably unable to show our faces for a while. I saw it in the distance as I unhooked the pump from my van. Some black mass is scuttling in our direction. I squinted, and sure enough, there were 2 antlers. I quickly got in my car and drove. We kept moving, with Jesus and me swapping as drivers. Will started complaining about his leg, and there were scratch marks on it. He was heavily infected. Black goop seeped out of the slashes, and I helped wash it and wrap it up. We talked about what it was, the thing following us, and I admitted that the book had something to do with it. We talked for a while, but we lost hope after 4 days of traveling away from this relentless thing. Even with translations, the book told us nothing. Will began to grow pale and withdrawn, not talking. We kept on, at a steady pace, a few miles above this thing, just hoping it would leave. It has been 13 days. Will died yesterday. He begged me to end his pain, and after clumps of flesh from his leg started falling off, I used my revolver to help him. We have run out of food. It hasn't stopped, and we are about to run out of gas. I have 2 bullets left, and I hope that whoever reads this doesn't make the same mistakes I do. Jesus and I hope that God forgives us.
Thanks for stepping into the shadows with Mr. Scareme. If our tales gave you chills, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell icon to never miss a scare. Remember, with Mr. Scareme, fear is just a click away. Until next time, stay spooky.